Dark bleatings, everyone! This is a fortnightly wrap-up because I couldn't do it last week, so we're talking about the 4 books that I've read, and I'm halfway through a couple of others, but we'll just talk about the 4. The 2 horror movies that I watched, one I liked and one not so much, and also book mail. Very exciting book mail I got for an upcoming book by a certain author who you should all know by now I am obsessed with. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about 3 of the books I read, and then the 2 films, and then I'm going to talk about my favourite book that I read in this fortnight last, so that I can waffle on about it at my leisure. So firstly, Horrorsmith Publishing's Fearforge Anthology Winter Quarter 2022. So I was a little bit late getting to this, as you might imagine. This was a review request, and I'm managing to like really plough through some of those ones that have been waiting a long time now. But yes, I finally got to it, and it's an anthology, like a themed anthology, I think. I'm assuming from the type of stories that were in it and the synopsis. So fears that are forged, I guess, would have been the theme. I'm not sure what the exact submission call out was, but that's the impression I got. So overall, I enjoyed it. It wasn't my favourite anthology, and I'm a very, very big fan of themes, so I enjoy themed anthologies very often. But so if I see like a zombie anthology, a ghost anthology, vampires, stuff like that, supernatural stuff, and I've been a part of a couple of really weird anthologies. One of them was called Give, an anthology of anatomical entries, and that one was an organ donation themed anthology that the proceeds went to organ donation charity. And yeah, so I like a weird theme, or I like something sort of like a blanket thing like vampires. And the Forge theme for this didn't really work for me because I couldn't, and I know this is going to sound like so stupid, but I just, the thought of a forge, blacksmithing and that kind of stuff just doesn't appeal to me in the slightest for some reason. I'm not very interested in that kind of stuff, I suppose. Like I think I associate it with like period pieces, and that's I prefer contemporary horror, so this anthology was kind of up against it with me as something that I would enjoy in the first place, just because it's not like something I would choose to pick up normally. However, I really enjoyed a few of the stories in there. Like overall, I think it's a pretty good anthology. It was really enjoyable, and it's introduced me to some new authors that I'll definitely pick some books up by. The 3 stories of note for me in this anthology that I really enjoyed were Lock and Key by Nat Whiston, and that one had serious sort of like Clive Barker kind of ideas, in my opinion, and I've said that with a couple of things I've read recently, and I'm really enjoying it. If like people are sort of like rediscovering or discovering Clive Barker, or it's just like a new wave of writing where that kind of style has like somehow come back round. I don't know what's going on, but I really love it. Like, it's high praise to be compared to Clive Barker. I'd love to be compared to Clive Barker. So yeah, that one gave me chills with where it went. I really enjoyed it. The second one I really enjoyed was Forging a Partnership by Justin Boot, and that I can't really tell you anything about that either, because again, short stories are really hard not to spoil, but that is about a serial killer who has a way of disposing of bodies, and he discovers that he may have targeted the wrong person for one of those, so that was really cool. And then the last one was like completely different kind of thing altogether, like really unique, maybe the most unique story in the anthology, according to me, and it's Mostly Alone by D.W. Gillespie, and that one had like a completely different tone to a lot of the others, and it was about someone that lives in a house that's like been passed down the family, and the house is haunted, and people have been considerate enough to make notes on the ghosts and like what they react to and things. So I just thought that was such a really cool idea, and I really liked it, and I just thought that was like kind of a beautiful story. So yeah, those are the 3 stories in it that I really enjoyed. I think if I have a gripe about the anthology that's not purely just based on my own personal reading taste, because yeah, take the other things I said with a grain of salt, because that's purely reading taste and nothing to do with the anthology or the authors or anything. There were a few that got a bit samey with the theme, as in like a few of the authors were very literal with the forgery theme, so they featured a forge, or their story centered around a forge, and the other ideas that were, you know, things that forge fear or forged items, things like that. So I did enjoy those. So it's not that the stories themselves weren't good, because they were, but as I said, because I'm not like that interested in forging stuff or like the process of forging, whatever, that started to feel a little bit samey to me, and I got a bit sort of like fatigued with that idea. So I read a couple of those, and then when I'd get to the next one and I was like, oh, this is about a forge again, I admit very unfairly that I just sort of like, in my head, I was like, oh, I'm not interested, and that's not fair to the authors that happened with, but I couldn't help it. That was just, my brain just kind of went, oh, no, another forge. But again, that's really not, that's nothing to do with the quality of the writing or the stories or anything. It's just me reading a book that's themed to a theme I don't like. So yeah, but overall it's a strong anthology. I thought that the writing was like consistently good. The stories were consistently enjoyable. And I would recommend it, especially if you're someone that doesn't have this weird anti-forge thing that I've realised I have. I didn't know that I was weird about forges. Yeah. The next book, I finished 30 Days of Night, Fear of the Dark by Tim Levin, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. It's a sequel to 30 Days of Night technically, but it isn't really. It's more of an in-universe tie-in, I would call it. It's set in London, totally different group of vampires. There are some mentions and references to what happened in Barrow from the film or the first book of the comics. And we're following different characters. So we've got a teenage boy called Marty, whose sister disappeared a few years ago, but he feels like she might still be around. And yeah, there's some sort of like vampire politics, I guess, going on, but not in the sense of, not like something you'd see in True Blood, for example, where there's like a vampire hierarchy and kings and queens and stuff. It's very underground. Vampires are very much not part of like popular culture. People don't know about them. Well, unlucky people know about them, but for the most part, yeah, humanity is kind of like blissfully ignorant, and there's like a whole bunch of stuff happening behind the scenes. And so I really enjoyed it. The sort of like more visceral, gory scenes are really, really fun if you enjoy vampire fiction. And the story, it was like, yeah, when I was finally able to like pick this up again, because I know that I had a bit of a delay on it, I flew through. So I was about 120 pages in the last time I saw you, and then I picked it up and finished it the next time. So yeah, I absolutely flew through it when I actually had time to sit and read properly, and I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend it. I also read The Laughing Policeman by Elizabeth J. Brown. So it's about a police detective called Stephen, and he has a partner in work called Charlie. And then behind the scenes, like in the prologue, it's set up that there's a demonic entity, very dangerous demonic entity is a thing, and the paths merge because something really, really awful happens to Stephen's family, and the people responsible it looks as though they're going to get away with it. So it was like the traumatic scenes where horrible things are happening were really, really well done. I felt emotional. I got very attached to the characters really, really quickly. The author did such a good job of humanizing everybody to the point where even the villainous characters, I wasn't rooting for them, don't get me wrong, but like I had like empathy, like I could understand, like I was like in the mind of one of them. So I had a bit of a conflicted relationship with that character, because I thought, well, if anything happens to them, they deserve it, but also I feel sorry for them, which was very strange. But that's, that's good writing. That's good layered character work and writing. The plot moves along at a lovely pace. It's oh man, so it's basically a revenge, karma, inherited family trauma kind of story with a curse. And yeah, everything just escalates in a very nice fashion. About midway through the book, you get some new characters that are thrown at you, and normally I don't like that, and I think that that's a really risky move on an author's part, but I really enjoyed it here. She really did such a good job. And again, with like these new characters coming in, initially when I saw it on that first page that they appear, I was like, are you kidding me? You're putting new people in? And I thought, well, that's my investment gone. I'm not going to be invested now. And then I was wrong, because 2 pages later I was incredibly invested and I had to know what happened to these people as well. So yeah, it was a really, really great read, and I'd definitely recommend that one. Let's move on to something I didn't love, shall we? In the films. So firstly, I watched The Lodge. I think there's a couple of films called The Lodge, so it's this one. I was really excited to see this because the criticisms I've seen of it, where I don't look for reviews before I see a thing, but I did see people saying that it was boring and it was really slow. So I was very excited to see it because that's my preferred style of horror. So for some context for what I do like, and there's a reason I'm telling you this, the kinds of films that I've really enjoyed that have been coming out in the last sort of 5 to 10 years are things like The Witch, The Invitation, Midsummer, Hereditary, The Blackcoat's Daughter. So I even liked I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House, a film that is universally just accepted as being the most boring thing ever put to film, but I really enjoyed it. So for me to find a film slow and boring, I feel like the bar is very high for what I'd get bored with, and I felt like I was in purgatory for the middle hour and 20 minutes maybe of this film. So the first half an hour, it was really promising, and they made a very ballsy decision with how they depicted something, the suddenness of it, and I was really enjoying how everything was framed. It's filmed beautifully, the score is interesting, and I thought that the sound design was done well. Like, you can feel something's really wrong, like basically right from the beginning. So I'll try not to give spoilers, but I'll warn you if I'm going to, so you can skip. It's about a man and his fiance takes his 2 kids to their family lodge for Christmas. The kids do not like this woman at all. They blame her for the parents being split up. They have very, very strong negative feelings towards her. And also, to make things worse, they're in their family lodge where they spent time as a foursome before their parents split up. So it's kind of like, yeah, great parenting, dad. You can tell that he's kind of crap as a dad. He's making terrible decisions. He's forcing this relationship, and he's being very unempathetic and unsympathetic to his children about the understandable resentment and feelings towards this woman. The woman in question as well is it's implied that they had an affair and that he left his wife for this woman, or at the very least he left his wife for this woman, but I think we can assume that the time frames got crossed there a little bit. And she is the sole survivor of a cult where everybody offed themselves, except for her. She was the last one, and she was the cult leader's daughter. So she's got this whole history of like indoctrination, cult stuff and trauma that she's dealing with. And the reason that the dad met her is because he was writing a book on cults. So there's an implied... there are things implied about the dad. You can read a lot into the dad, the kind of person that he is from that kind of stuff, because, yeah, I don't know, maybe other people would have a different opinion, but I couldn't stand him. I thought he was the worst. So anyway, they go to this lodge, and then some very weird things start to happen, and you're trying to figure out, is it her? Is it them? Is it the cult? Is it ghosts? Like, what is it? And I was really along for the ride and really excited, but then it just started to like drag in a way that like I was no longer intrigued, because like things were getting repeated, and I thought, oh yeah, we get the point, we don't know what's real, she doesn't know what's real, and blah 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 blah. And the resolution was not worth the journey, and I was so disappointed, because like this film had like all the right ingredients, and then I was like really, really disappointed with it. So I am going into spoilers now for why I really didn't like it in the end. So as it turns out, have you gone? Have you paused? Have you skipped away? Skip away now if you don't want to know what happens in the lodge. So yes, spoiler territory. So in the beginning, the kid's mother, she clearly doesn't want the divorce. He tells her that he wants it now because he wants to marry the other woman, and she goes home and very promptly shoots herself, and it's really shocking. So not that that kind of thing gets me going like, oh goody, but I was so like, oh, what's gonna I thought like, right, all expectations gone out the window, because it was the way that they, so usually when you see that in a film, they build it up a little bit so that you expect it, so you're prepared, but this just like took me completely off guard. It was so sudden, and I thought, oh, this one has balls, like who knows where this is gonna go. And then yeah, the build up when they're traveling to the lodge and everything, and you can see the kids like not only blame this woman for the breakup, but they blame her for the death of their mother as well. So it's really heavy subject wise, and you can understand the kids' attitudes towards this woman. But then when you actually finally see this woman, she's just a nice lady that's trying to get on with her life, probably taken advantage of, in my opinion, by this guy writing a book that was older than her, knew everything about her, and you know, she's a vulnerable person. So yeah, I really didn't like him, and he drives off and leaves the three of them alone in the lodge. So yeah, just terrible decisions. So my first thing where I struggled with this a little bit was I couldn't believe that I could believe, with the kind of dad that he set up to be, that he would force this relationship, that he'd take them up to the family lodge where they've got memories of their mother, and that he'd selfishly just try and plow ahead with this relationship regardless and just force the kids to accept it. I get that. I had a hard time believing that a man that knows that his current partner is fragile, absolutely hated by the kids, and she's struggling with the fact that they hate her, like she's trying but they don't want to know. I find it really difficult to believe that he would just drive off for a couple of days and leave them all alone when that's the first time they've spent any real time with her. I could have accepted it and just suspended my disbelief a little bit if it wasn't for the fact that you find out near the end that he hasn't even spoken to this woman. There was a snowstorm, they're all, you know, they're kind of stranded in, but if you can't get hold of anybody, you'd start panicking and you'd alert the authorities, or you'd make sure you got there somehow. And you find out in the end that his daughter's been speaking to him on the phone, but he hasn't spoken to his partner. And I just thought, that's ridiculous. Like, if he had a way to contact them, which he did, he wouldn't have said, oh, hand the phone over to her at any point. Like, that wouldn't be odd to him. He only gets worried about it in the end when he's finished up his business trips and he's gonna go back anyway. Secondly, the weirdness of what's happening in this lodge is down to the kids. So the woman is medicated, she has delusions, and you know, she's trying to manage her mental health, but she does have some issues, some trauma-based issues that are very severe, obviously, because of what she went through. But she's just trying to, you know, live a normal life as much as she can, and she's nice to these kids and she's trying her best to bond with them and everything. And they decide to mess with her, and she wakes up one day and her meds are gone, all of the food is gone, their like warm clothes are gone, like they've emptied all the cupboards and drawers and everything, like all of their stuff is gone, and they deny all knowledge of it. And then they're messing with her in other ways, like things like they keep setting the date on the clocks forward, so it's like they've been there longer, and it's always the same day. So they're basically trying to convince her that they've all died. And some people think that the son particularly was trying to push her to off herself, but the general thing is that at the very least they were just trying to drive her nuts, or maybe drive her away, like altogether. And then in the end they're so successful at convincing her that they've all already died that she kills them all. You don't see it on screen with the kids, but you know that that's what happens. And yeah, because she doesn't have her medication, her mental health takes an absolute dive, and because of that, combined with like the manipulation she's under and everything, and she is someone that's susceptible to being manipulated, as evidenced by her history and things like that. So I was so I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because it went from being a really interesting, like potentially really artistic and smart film to just ridiculous. So like the dad not coming back earlier when he couldn't get hold of her, there's that. He, you know, surely he would have known that something was wrong. Secondly, for this entire plan to work, it meant that the kids had to have premeditated the entire thing, and so it turns them into absolute despicable villains instead of kids who are acting out. And I don't like that the film did that, because they didn't need to be a villain in this story. They didn't need to be a bad guy. Everyone's point of view was understandable, and it could have been done in a different way. So things that the kids would have arranged before they got to the lodge. So this is like the depths that they went to. They made a photo, like an RIP photo of the two of them, and buried it in the snow outside the house as if like a memorial had been set up at some point. They also created a very convincing looking obituary notice with the three of them on it, with all these details. How good are these kids' media skills at this age? I mean, I suppose that's possible. We do have the internet. Kids are more tech savvy now, but for God's sake, would they have thought of this though this far ahead of time, you know? They took a harness so that he could pretend to hang himself, to show her that even though he's hanging, he's still alive, because they're already actually dead. And I just thought that is absolutely ridiculous. She wouldn't have seen the harness. Oh, for God's sake. They researched Grace's, that's the stepmother, they researched her background, so they would know how to trigger her, which they would have access to that information because the dad had all that info. But again, none of this was passworded. Like, these are all very private, sensitive files and documents, and he catches them watching a really bad video, so you'd think he'd lock his office after that. So, but they went to these lengths. They collected a recording of the cult leader's voice, put it onto a tape, and played it in the house so that she would think she was hearing voices. And I'm sorry, but who can't tell? I mean, well, maybe this is a thing, but I just feel like there would be a difference in how you would perceive the sound if it was in your head, or if you can hear it coming from a speaker that's somewhere in the house. So this is something they did ahead of time. The fact that they thought that they could drive her insane implies to me that they knew she was on medication, because they took it and hid it with no qualms. But the dad apparently didn't know she was on medication because she was hiding it from him. So either they just went ahead assuming that they could drive a sane person insane, or they knew she had the medication but the dad didn't know about it. So like, that doesn't make any sense to me. They took some sort of sedative with them, and then when they made her a hot chocolate or a tea or whatever to knock her out, they could hide all of the stuff. So they thought of that ahead of time. And the last thing I noted was that they apparently acted all of this out in a dollhouse that the little girl owns, that's basically the exact replica of the lodge they're staying in, and they've got these little dolls. So they acted all these scenes out in there, which I thought was like an artistic framing device, like in between scenes. But the dad looks at the dollhouse towards the end, and then he gets worried because he sees this like death scene set up. So that, you know, so were they just in there with the dolls going, oh, we'll do this and we'll do, like, I had a hard time believing that two grief-stricken children, however angry they are, would have the wherewithal and the intelligence and the preparation skills necessary to think in this much detail about every step of their plan. Don't even start me on the gun. So yeah, I didn't like that anyone was vilified at all. There are some people I've seen online that are vilifying the stepmom, like, oh great, they made this into a mental health is the enemy thing, you know, as soon as she's not medicated, her mental health drives her to be violent. I actually didn't read the film that way. I thought that the film was very sympathetic towards Grace, actually, and her mental health was like a big factor in what was going on with her, but I didn't think that they villainized that. But they, in my opinion, they very certainly villainized the children, which really pissed me off, because they're two grief-stricken kids who 6 months ago lost their mum, and they're being forced to spend their first Christmas without her with the woman they think is responsible for it. So I just thought, like, there are so many ways they could have done this. Yeah, so I don't want to just sit and criticize it and not say what I would do differently. So here's what I would have done differently in hindsight. So I would have had it so that nobody knew that Grace was on any sort of medication, and maybe she was just hiding it because she just wanted to, you know, because she was worried about how she might be viewed or whatever. And it would have been better, in my opinion, if she had hidden it in a food item that nobody else was going to eat or something like that, you know, birth control pills, something that no one else is going to take. So when the kids hide all the food, they sort of inadvertently take her meds without realising it. And then by the time they do realise that something is like way more wrong than they initially anticipated, it's too late. Like they're not going to be able to get her back on those meds now, even if they do find them. I think in that way I would have just found the actions of the children more believable, because even if they didn't know about the meds before they got to the lodge, they found them and hid them, so they knew about them at least at that point. And I just have a hard time believing that two kids would be so thoroughly evil as to do that, especially because they're responsible for the death of a dog. And I just don't think that they would. I just didn't buy that. I really did. Let's move on. Let's move on to the next film that I saw, which is Bird Box Barcelona. Now this I liked more, and I was surprised because I had some issues with Bird Box, but overall I enjoyed it. I didn't like the concept in Bird Box that you've got like the people who see the thing and then they'll immediately off themselves. There's a theme to what I watched, isn't there? And then there are the people who see the thing and they don't do that, but they're obsessed with getting everybody else to see, and they think it's so beautiful and blah blah blah. And I didn't like that the caveat for the people who could see the thing and live was that it was crazy people, because I was like, what do you mean? Like, define crazy, like we're like anyone. But they kind of like retcon that a bit here. So Bird Box Barcelona, and spoilers because I cannot avoid them for talking about this either, this is a sort of a Spanish sequel to Bird Box. It's an entirely different perspective, set in a different place and all that. So we start during like the apocalypse, like that's already happened, so everyone's walking around blindfolded and things like that. But the thing that made me smile so much about it was that our main character is walking around with his daughter. They're very nervous of other people. They find a group. He tells her to hide and he'll let her know if it's safe, if the people can be trusted. And then he goes to stay with them, and I was rolling my eye. I almost turned it off because I was rolling my eyes at it thinking, as if he would have just left his daughter alone in the world as it currently is, with all the dangers. But then you realise that the guy is one of the seers. He's seen the monster, and his mission is to get everyone else to see it. So by trustworthy people, he meant people we can expose to the monster and they'll be like us. And I won't spoil any more than that about it, but yeah, watching that film from the perspective of from that perspective was like really interesting, rather than just getting a sequel with somebody else that was like the characters in the first one. I think that I've seen people saying that they thought that this film was way better than the first one, but I don't think that this would work without the context of the first one, if that makes sense. So if you watch this as a standalone, I think you'd understand it just fine, but it as a follow-on from the first one, it's just way more interesting, I think, because you've already got all of the context of the seers and all of that stuff, and you already know the rules. Towards the end of the film, they try to offer more of an explanation about why some people can look and why some can't, and it was okay. I appreciated that they tried to zero in on that a little bit more, make a bit more sense. I'm sure that there's another sequel be in the works at some point, because they ended it in a way where it could end, but they also ended it in a way where it could continue. There were some incredibly stupid moments in this film, and if you've seen it, you know, you're gonna know what I'm talking about, like the jump to the cage, for example. Absolutely ridiculous, but yeah, overall I thought it was pretty good. And now on to my most enjoyed horror thing that I consumed this last fortnight, and it is The Glut by Matthew Cash. I mentioned this in my A to Z of horror book recommendations that I put up on Tuesday, and I have to talk about it more here. So I'm so terrible remembering characters' names. Hold on, let me scroll to my... Yes, so it's about Vince, a morbidly obese man that is really struggling with just not eating all the time. Like, he's really got this like compulsion to just eat, and he knows logically that it's really bad for him. He knows that he's unhealthy, he's gonna have an early death because of this and all of that, but he just can't stop. And I just feel like that's very relatable. And the way, because we're in sort of like Vince's perspective, is quite sympathetically handled, and I really liked that because it was very different to what we normally see in sort of like pop culture society, where there's a tendency to just demonize people for having issues like this, especially around food. Like, a lot of assumptions are made about overweight people that aren't true and aren't really founded, and you know, it's like people who are morbidly obese then, for example, get treated as like a group, as if everyone in the group is the same, rather than like as individual people, like people of average weight are treated. So like there's a very big difference in how people are treated based entirely on looks, and I enjoyed this perspective. It was very sympathetic, and it was very like explanatory about like the mind frame and everything, and it was really interesting. And it was just easy, even though like there are some aspects to Vince's personality that I really didn't like at all. I could really understand him, and I was like rooting for him. So he finds a weight loss method, and I'm not going to go into spoilers on this book, by the way. He finds this weight loss method that's incredibly unconventional, but seems to work. And I oh man, it involves a ritual. And it's so disgusting, and initially I didn't want to pick this book up just based on the cover and the title. I thought it was going to be like the most disgusting kind of extreme horror, and I don't like extreme horror really, but it's not extreme horror. Like, it is disgusting, I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, there are some paragraphs that I did have to skip over because I was feeling quite nauseated, but it's such a good story, and there's like a sense of humor with it, because if it wasn't so well written, the concept is, it starts to get like, it could have been ridiculous, but it was like done so well in this book that I was just like I was like, yeah, I accept all of this. It was great. And I thought that it was going to be like one man story, but it just starts opening and opening and opening out, so like the scope gets so much bigger as you're going along. It was such a fun time. What was I gonna say? So there's a theory about obsessive compulsive addiction type behavior in this book, in that the thing that causes it is something that can be separate to you. So like, it's in everyone, but you can remove that part. And I thought that concept was like really interesting, because I'm sure that anyone that has any sort of addiction would love to be able to just reach inside and just remove the parts of them that like compels them to do whatever the behavior is. Like, if you try to quit smoking, or if you overeat, or I don't know, if you're a violent person, you like to punch people all the time, just sort of like things that negatively impact your life, but you're doing them anyway and you just can't seem to stop. Like, so yeah, I really enjoyed the concept that you could just get rid of that part of you and not have to live with it anymore. But the book, yeah, so it was just like a really unique concept about a Jekyll Hyde kind of scenario, I suppose, but it just, you know, it is a horror story. Of course, things are not going to be that simple, and it's absolutely nuts. I will say I would love to see this as a film. I think it would make such a great, like, sort of tongue-in-cheek satire about the standards, societal standards on people. It would just be so much fun, I think. I can't recommend it enough. I'm someone who looked at the cover and thought, I don't want to read it, and I only read it because it was sent as a review request to happygoathorror.com, and also I know the author as well, like the author's a mate, so and I don't mean that disrespectfully to Matthew or the cover artist or anything, but I just thought this is the absolute opposite of the kind of stuff I like to write, because I made an assumption based on the cover. So if you look at the cover and you're like me, I'm only saying that because I think I'm saying, like, give it a shot anyway. You might be very pleasantly surprised, as I was. I was entertained thoroughly by the entire thing. So that's my rambly wrap up for this week. I am currently reading The Devil Device by Dave Jeffrey, which I meant to get to earlier, but if you saw my last couple of videos, you'll know I've had some pet issues. I'm reading Black City Skyline by Barry Lee DeJasu. I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name, Barry, if you see this. And I'm also reading Meeting in the Devil's House by Richard Dansky, which is a short story collection. But the thing that's bumped to the top of my pile, I received the most glorious book mail from Adam Nevill this week. This is All the Fiends of Hell. This is the limited edition hardcover you can order. So if you haven't pre-ordered and you love the look of this, I would get it now, because these do tend to sell out relatively quickly. Once again, the most wonderful cover art by Samuel Araya. I'm sorry, Sam, I know I always say your name wrong. One of these beautiful sort of black and red cover books. I always have to have like the hardback covers because they're so beautiful sitting together. I love the font on the spine, little Ritual Limited logo there. I am so excited. I don't know what this is about because I typically like to go into books blind, so even though I've been like super excited for this to come out, I haven't looked at what it's about at all. I haven't looked at the synopsis. I don't even know what kind of horror this is. I have no idea, but I've been so excited about it purely on that it's an Adam Nevill book, and I sincerely have never rated an Adam Nevill book lower than 5 out of 5. So every time he has a new release coming, I like probably one of the first people to get on the pre-order list and everything. He very kindly sent this to me because I've promoted all of his other works so frequently and enthusiastically, I think, for like the last 2 years. I never stop talking about Adam Nevill. I bring up his books at every available opportunity, even when I'm not reviewing a book in a particular video. I managed to work his name in there somewhere. So yes, he sent me this as an ARC. I cannot wait to read it. I really haven't had time this week. I've had a lot of stuff going on with the cat and all that stuff still. But I have set aside the rest of my day today, so that's all I'm doing today, is I'm going to be reading this. So by the time you see this video, I'll probably be about halfway through it, and I'm so excited. And they will be, I know I say this with other stuff and then I never get around to it, but they will 100% be a dedicated video review of this as soon as I'm done. I'm so excited. Hope that wasn't too rambly for you. I'm not only still exhausted by all the pet shenanigans, but I'm also not feeling very well today, so my head isn't screwed on as much as I would like. I hope you found something of interest here though. I hope that one of these recommendations will be good for you. And I don't have a sign off, but I just one other thing before we go though, I was just wondering if maybe you could subscribe. I don't have a sign off, so please